Hello y'all, and welcome back. In the previous video I defined metaphysics and epistemology and introduced the debate over free will and determinism, defining some core terms. In this video I'm going to get into the specifics of the way that debate shapes up, one way that debate shapes up, but first there's a very important distinction I need to draw. See, the distinction or debate or tension between free will versus determinism is going to depend very heavily, if not entirely, on what your primary metaphysical paradigm is. And here's what I mean by that. There are, of course, many metaphysical paradigms, many fundamental ways of viewing the world, but at the end of the day, and I spent my entire adult life studying philosophy, so I guess 23, 24 years, there's really only two main ones. The first is what is known as naturalism. Now, naturalism, of course, you define it at the risk of being corrected by naturalists, but I've tried to frame my definition in a way that does justice to the many naturalists that I know and I'm friends with. And as I see it, naturalism consists of two primary tenets. The first is a wholesale denial of anything supernatural. So it's the idea that nothing supernatural exists. So the naturalists will, of course, deny the existence of God. God, by definition, is a supernatural being. Also souls, angels, demons, heaven, hell, anything related to witches, magic, any of that. A naturalist is going to say that that is not real. Now, naturalism is often used synonymously with atheism, and this is not totally unfair because overwhelmingly naturalists are atheists and vice versa, but they are not synonyms, and it is possible to be an atheist without being a naturalist. One fascinating example that I would be remiss not to present here. So a few years back, I had a young lady in class who was an atheist. She was a very, outspoken atheist. She had lost a close friend to cancer when she was younger, and she believed that a loving God wouldn't allow that. However, she had this experience, which she shared with me and with the class, of when she was 15 years old, she went to a family gathering, and a family member told her that she was very pretty. They said, "You're so pretty," but they didn't touch her. And she said that later on that night, she got very sick, and over the subsequent days, she got so sick that she almost died. And she believed this was because of Oho, the evil eye, that is, according to the belief, conveyed when you admire something without touching it. So she believed in Oho, an unambiguously supernatural idea, though she was not a theist. And there are plenty of people like this out there who believe in some form of supernatural thing, whether that be an occurrence or a phenomenon or whatever, but they don't believe in God. So not synonymous terms, although they often overlap. The second tenet of naturalism is the idea that the physical sciences in principle explain all of reality. And here's what I mean by that. So I've had many conversations with naturalists who advance the case for naturalism very broadly along these lines. They say, look, early in human existence, we would see things like hurricanes or, thunderstorms even, tidal waves, and we would conclude that this is the power of the gods. And as science progresses, we realize that more and more of what we used to ascribe to the supernatural, what we used to ascribe to the divine, comes about through natural causes. So it stands to reason that, well, yes, there are people who believe in God because they say, oh, this miraculous thing happened, or you can't explain that, atheists. They say sooner or later science will progress to the point where we can easily explain even those phenomena, even those purported miracles, through science. So it's not the claim that the physical sciences now, as they stand, explain all of reality, but that in principle they could. And I've spoken to many naturalists who say, well, I'm not religious, but if I had to pick a religion, I would say it's science. I believe what good science says. I follow the science. So nothing supernatural exists. The physical sciences can, in principle, explain all of reality. That's naturalism. The alternate view, the opposed view, I'm going to call supernaturalism. And supernaturalism is one of these terms like dualism, which is applied, liberally or to many different things. I resist the idea that there's one specific thing that it has to refer to, although it's often used to refer to a particular movement in the 19th century. But as I use it, it just means the belief that something supernatural exists. So my friend who's an atheist but believes in Oho would be, in virtue of that fact, a supernaturalist. If you believe just in God, maybe don't believe in other supernatural stuff, you'd be a supernaturalist. But the concomitant idea here is the idea that the physical sciences can and do explain a lot, but they can't explain everything. So if you hold that there's some occurrence or some phenomena or something that can't be explained save by reference to God, whether that be or save without reference to souls or spirits or something like that, you would, in virtue of that, be a supernaturalist. So these are the two primary paradigms. Now, overwhelmingly, the most common form of supernaturalism is going to be theism. So I'm going to focus on theistic supernaturalism here because the problem of free will versus determinism is going to shape up in a very particular way for a theist. So a theist is going to believe that God is a perfect being who possesses many attributes. One of the core attributes there is going to be divine sovereignty. And this, of course, is going to be the Judeo-Christian Muslim God, although down the road I'm going to argue that there's less distinction among different conceptions of God than many people suppose. Sovereignty, divine sovereignty, is the idea that God is sovereign. God is king of the world he created. He is completely in control. And since he's in control of everything and you're a thing, he's in control of you. So you might think that you're making some real difference in the world, whether that's a difference kind of in your own life or politically or militarily or whatever, but really God is pulling the strings, he's controlling everything. And this raises the question of, if God is in fact sovereign in this way, how can we be free? How can we be making any meaningful difference if God is in fact sovereign? So this is the question of divine sovereignty versus human freedom. In the previous module, we explored the closely related question of divine foreknowledge versus human freedom. So how do you respond to this? Well, one possible response is to draw an analogy, this is the analogy I like to draw, with a high school classroom. So all of us, I should think, have been inside a high school classroom at some point in our lives. I, years ago, used to teach high school, and the particular assignment I was given was teaching high school freshman boys. I know. There's not a lot of difference between a group of these high school freshman boys and a group of chimpanzees, meaning if you leave them for any length of time, they will physically destroy absolutely everything in the room. And so you can tell right away upon walking into a high school freshman classroom whether the teacher has control or not. It's very obvious. I rarely did. There's a reason that I teach college now. But a teacher that does have control of the classroom, here's what that does not mean. It doesn't mean that the teacher is the only person who speaks or moves or interacts with members of the classroom or interacts with things in the classroom or does anything. That would be a bad class. A classroom where a teacher has control is going to be a classroom where everybody in the room is going to speak and move around the room and interact with other members of the class and interact with things in the classroom, the blackboard or whatever, but only at the time when, and in a way that, and to an extent that, the teacher is okay with it. So there's lots and lots and lots of free action here, but the teacher is controlling it in the sense that they control when and how these things happen. And the same can be said of the picture of divine sovereignty that a theist advances. God's in control in the sense that a good teacher is in control, but that doesn't even suggest that God is making us do the things that we do. We're still freely doing those things. God could just sort of, hit the brakes, stop things, or change things if he sees fit. And indeed, on the doctrine of divine sovereignty, he is doing this all the time. So, in a very preliminary way, this is how the question of free will versus determinism shapes up for somebody who believes in God, in a divinely sovereign God. Again, God is in control does not mean that God does everything. The way that this particular question shapes up for a naturalist is going to be quite different, and we'll explore that in the next video. Thanks.